PV grammar is not represented in the literature either of linguistic theory or teaching practice. It is a personal contribution that has been worked on and used over many years. Its aim is to create a nucleus of syntactic structures or kernel sentences in the terminology of Z.S. Harris and Noam Chomsky, derived from the speaker's engagement with the environment. In this presentation, we shall be looking at the backup theory together with the 8 kernel sentences or communication units that are, I suggest, the input data that could make them a useful tool in any MOOCs practice. So this does relate in some way to MOOCs. This dual approach, theoretical and pedagogic, permits the use of traditional terminology alongside PV terminology. However, and importantly, there is one basic concept of all existing grammars that is irrelevant to PV grammar. This is the concept of the subject-predicate division. In the sentence so familiar to theoretical linguists, the dog bit the man, the dog is the subject and bit the man is the predicate. PV grammar views this sentence as a non-divisible communication unit consisting of 3 constituents, where the verb, bit, expresses a relation between what comes before, the initial, the dog, and what comes after, the terminal, the man. This relation is perceived by the speaker. It is the speaker's point of view. Hence, PV, point of view, PV grammar. Allow me to introduce my old friends, Jack and Jill. There they are. And there we have my 8 communication units. These are a couple of kids who went up the hill. Jack and Jill went up the hill to get a pail of water. They're now adults by a long chalk, and Jack is an artist, and Jill is an art critic. What a relationship. Each of PV Grammar's 8 communication units consists of 3 constituents. The terms initial, primary relator, and terminal are used instead of the traditional subject, verb, and whatever, in order to direct thinking away from the mold of Latin grammar, so helping to rethink basic assumptions. Initial is simply whatever begins, including, for example, there in there's a pint on the bar. Terminal is whatever ends. That is, whatever immediately follows the finite verb. And primary relator describes the function of the finite verb in relation to initial and terminal. It is primary in order to distinguish it from prepositions, which in PV are secondary relators. Each of the communication units is an IRT, initial, relator, terminal. The primary relator expresses the speaker's perception of the relation. Terminals are features of the speaker's environment. Every utterance, therefore, is a perception of a relation between the initial and a feature of the environment. This self-environment interaction is the basis of PV as a theory of language. As a teaching learning tool, the features of the environment, or terminal features, are what distinguish one communication unit from the other 7. The English language expresses these features as parts of speech, as references to actions and states in points and periods of time and in space, and the state or situational outcome of actions. Since the speaker's perception of relations is fundamental to an understanding of PV, we need to further clarify the idea of the speaker's choice of primary relator. So, imagine a situation. Back to our protagonists, Jill and Jack. They have a car. Jill is a good driver, while the inept Jack has never really understood which gear to engage. One day, Jill is feeling off colour, but has to get to an appointment, and would rather not drive. As the speaker, or narrator, I might say one of the following. Jill has Jack drive, meaning Jack has no objection. Jill makes Jack drive if Jack has initially refused. Jill gets Jack to drive if Jill manages to persuade him, and Jill lets Jack drive if Jack insists on driving. Here, the speaker's perception of the event is expressed by the choice of causative verb. Each of the 4 utterances is a compound of 2 IRTs. And then we have an illustration of 2 compounds, one with 3 of the verbs, causative verbs, and the other one with gets, which is different. They put different IRTs together. Since these causative structures involve a time shift, the having, the making, the getting, and the letting being an event preliminary to Jack driving, and since all events take place in space, in this case, a conversation in the house, and the resulting action in the car, we represent space-time as a timeline within a circle. This then is the speaker's environment, or precisely the environment of which the speaker is a part. Jill makes is at point C, center, present, while Jack drive is at point D, future. With the speaker in the center, present time consists of recent past and immediate future. At 12 o'clock midday, today will be morning, past, and afternoon, future. The speaker, I, expresses the relation makes at point C, and we can mind map the space-time implications of the syntactic situational equivalence. The complete mind map is PV's fictive representation of the plot of language and thought, as these are suggested by space-time relations in the English language. The speaker is an integral component of environment, and therefore one of its relational features, howbeit the feature that perceives the relations. The 8 communication units, or IRTs, are shown here with the verb be as the primary relator. Be and get are the only verbs that allow 7 terminal features. The chart acts as a useful student's guide to the syntactic possibilities of verbs. This second chart shows the 8 units with different verbs as primary relator. The 8 terminals are the only features of the environment that the language recognizes and expresses as parts of speech, nouns and adjectives, particles, forms of the verb, simple, present participle, past participle, infinitive, and prepositional phrases. We'll come back to the last one later. The 3 constituent structure of each IRT places the terminal in relation to the initial through the primary relator, this relation being the focus of meaning. IRT 1, with noun phrase as terminal, is the basis for teaching structures with transitive verbs and for various types of direct and indirect object, as well as different classes of noun and noun phrases. It can also be combined with other IRTs to form a great variety of structures, depending on the syntactic possibilities of the verb. Jill wants to drive, for example, is a compound of IRT 1, Jill wants something. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Jill wants something, and IRT 6, Jack is to drive. IRT 2, with adjective as terminal, is the basis for teaching different classes of adjective, their terminal and prenominal position, adjectives that cannot take the prenominal position, such as awake and asleep, and comparative structures. IRT 3, here comes the crunch, with particle as terminal, is the verb plus particle structure that traditional grammar terms, as we all know, phrasal verb, where the particle, such as up in wake up, or adverbs such as back in go back, is said to merge with the verb to create a unique meaning. In PV, the structure Jack wakes up expresses a perceived relation between the initial Jack and the terminal up. Up signifying the state ensuing from the action. Wakes. On the mind map, Jack wakes is C, while up, meaning Jack is up, is D. In PV terms, therefore, particles are digests of states resulting from actions. In simple non-compound IRTs, they refer to the initial, whereas in compounds such as Jack gets Jill up, they refer to the second noun. Jack does something. The state following that is Jill is up. This is better understood in situational context. The example of IRT 3, Jane psychos up. Number 3, Jane psychos up. Is taken from an episode of Black Mirror on the protagonist Jane in the episode has to prepare herself for the difficult task of firing an employee and says to her assistant, I need to psycho up. When she has readied herself psychologically, she is, as it were, up. These are 2, not 1, moments in time. First, actions, when Jane shakes her arms, takes a walk round her desk, and sets her expression. Second, a state, indicating readiness. The important for us in PV teaching learning point here is that students should be exposed to a number of literal and more abstract meanings of the particles and come to a realization of their composite meaning. This would enable them to understand both existing and new examples of verb plus particle, phrasal verb if you like. Such composite meaning can usefully be presented in visual form. Here is an example of our hero, up. Hero because it's the most common particle which follows, which occurs in the structure. That goes from preposition to particle. The A, B, C lower area is that of the verbs. The C, D, E upper area, that of the ensuing state or situation, which is well illustrated by the ended up in the last one, where up is a digest of going to the pub instead. So-called 3-part phrasal verbs, such as put up with, look up to, and get on with, are examples of an IRT3, thank you, and IRT7 compound. Since that third part is a preposition, and as such begins a prepositional phrase. We put up with a tiresome situation. Look up to an older sister and get on with our work. To treat these 3 items as having some kind of unity prevents teachers from getting the base meanings of put up, look up, and get on across to learners. I have to go back. The mind map of IRT4, Jack is painting, is the speaker's perception at point C, I hope you remember it, of an action spreading from B to D. Might be today. With a change of verb, such as remember, it fills only the past section of the present circle, because Jill remembers cooking. Number 4, cooking the previous day. Action remaining in the mind to the present moment. 5, RIT5, Jill is employed with the past participle as terminal, relates the past action at B, past, to the present moment of speaking. This is so when the primary relator is the verb of experience, have. The active form, somebody has employed Jill, being a compound of IRT5 and IRT1. Somebody employed Jill. That's the compound. The transformation from active to passive does not hold in PV in the same way as in traditional grammars. In PV, they are different ways of perceiving the relation. RT6, Jack is to cook, projects the action or state into the future, which appears to be the infunction of the preposition to, with reference not only to time, but to space, as in Jill goes to Albania. IRT7, Jill is in Jack's studio, is for verbs that are followed by mandatory prepositional phrases, as in, we rely on technology. You can't say we rely. Jack longs for success, and they count on our help. The primary relator in IRT8 is an intransitive verb, the self-environment relation being between the action and initial, therefore allowing for the use of reflexive pronouns. The initial itself, whether animate or inanimate, is part of the environment. The main pedagogic advantage of the 8 communicative units of PV grammar is that they offer an immediate global view of the syntax of English. Just as astronauts say they feel they understand and appreciate Earth when they see the whole of it from space, it would create an invaluable learning advantage if students were given a global awareness of English grammar, especially syntax. However, our present grammars offer a fragmentary, incoherent view. PV would like to see the first page, as it were, of English grammar as the 8 basic communication units, to which all subsequent structures make reference by compounding and transformation. They might be learnt by heart and presented as a simple story. Here's a simple story. Batman arrives. He has a cape. His costume is black. He's well trained. Past, past. His enemy Joker is coming. He wants to kill. He turns up at night. Joker relies on his knowledge of Batman, but eventually Batman wins. Effective syllabuses for learning a foreign language are a combination of activities to achieve sociolinguistic, pragmatic, and 4 skills competencies, as well as knowledge of grammar and phonology. Since a great deal of exposure time is needed to achieve the non-linguistic competencies, a grammar which reduced the amount of time dedicated to syntax would be advantageous. The Council of Europe framework of reference is famously based on 6 language levels. A language syllabus whose priority is exposure and use would not necessarily be dominated by the 6-level scheme, but would aim at abundance of exposure and use within or relation to a global approach to grammar requiring reduced, efficient language learning time. At the Associazione Boardman English, John Douch, who is actually videoing this, John Douch and I are now working on the kind of PV grammar syllabus and types of activity that might achieve this aim, especially by means of online delivery. Thank you very much, and if you would like a copy of the handout, I'll put them on the desk here, and you can just go and take one if you would like one. Okay? Thank you.